Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Baffled, where we want to help you understand your misunderstood teen. And I am your host, Jonathan Reyes. And today we're going to be talking about where science meets faith. Stay tuned because this is something that you, as a youth worker or a parent, are going to enjoy. All right, fam, we are live, and I'm here with Alan. Alan is a jack of all trades. He serves his church in the youth ministry as a deacon. He serves with Man Up, a local nonprofit here in the Tampa Bay area. And then him and good buddy Jeff started the Science Dilemma.
Yeah.
So, Alan, thank you so much just for joining us today. Today, I wanted to talk about just this idea of when science meets faith.
Mm.
You serve in youth ministry. You know, one of the things when serving in youth ministry is you want to equip young people for the realities when they go to college. Not all of our students are going to go to Bible college. Not all of them are going to go to a Christian university.
Yeah.
And they're going to get caught up with hearing about evolution or even postmodernism. Um, One of the things I wanted to ask you from your perspective is that the stats show that 2/3 of young people abandon their faith once they get to college. And why do you think that is?
Man, I know that the trend we don't have enough data now because it's developing and the trend is starting to change. But I think that the reason is like multifaceted, right? It's there is a lack of educating people on the arguments that will be presented to them, right? So when they go to college, they're going to be presented with so many different things that are attacking their faith, right? Satan isn't dumb, he's been around. And so he's not just tackling your academic side, he's tackling your your social side, right? So you have a bunch of people around you that you're becoming friends with that don't believe in God. Then that's also now then all, like stacking on top of that is the academics in that space that are grading you are also saying there's no way that God could ever exist based on what science says and based on what philosophy says. And again, they're positioning themselves as the experts, but they're not necessarily the ones that are at the top of the food chain when it comes to being the scientist, right? But as an 18-year-old student, you don't know any better. And if nobody prepared you for that, and they just told you, hey, and let me be very clear, like the Bible does suffice, right? The word of God is enough, but God also calls us to be wise and to educate ourselves. Colossians talks about, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So yeah, again, it's multifaceted. There's like community. So lack of good community and relationships is one, and then lack of equipping a saint and educating them, I think, is the other.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things we say at More to Life when we do our presentations to students is that you are going to be influenced by the people you're surrounded yourself with.
100%.
So if all of your friends, if you don't have any good godly influences and all of the people you are around are going in the opposite direction, it's almost inevitable that you are going to be headed down that direction.
Exactly.
And there's this thing, we're not monks, we're not trying to retreat from the world, we're going to be in the world regardless, but it's almost like when we're talking about students. So a lot of the people who tune in either serve in youth ministry, they're teachers, or they're just parents. They're people who are constantly around teenagers. And, I came to faith at 23 years old.
Mm.
When I was a teenager, I was not following the Lord. And I know that I had a dad who prayed for me. I had a mom who came to faith later, who started to pray for me. And, prayer is the work, but there is an essence where I remember as a young kid, I would get turned off when I had a legitimate question and it was just like discarded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even tell me about that. Have you had, even in your situation, in your experience, where the students are asking really good questions and sometimes the answer is I don't know, or maybe it just requires a long nuanced approach? Like, from your experience, like, what are the questions that some of these students are even asking today?
Yeah. I think people's biggest question is always, and the scariest one, right, is the problem of evil. Like, how could a good God allow evil to exist? Why does he allow suffering? Why do good people suffer? I think those are questions that many of us have to grapple with. And sometimes it's hard for Christians to say, like, because God knows best and that's it. Like we try to throw these one-liners instead of allowing the student to wrestle with that question. And I think that that's something that we've failed to do often is allowing students to understand that this relationship with God isn't rigid. It's not something that has to look one way. Like God wrestles with us and he actually invites that wrestling as long as it's, met with respect, right? We have to understand and be reverent to God, but in the midst of that, we can wrestle with him. So, yeah, I think the problem of evil is, of course, one, as well as, can you believe in um Darwinian evolution and still be a Christian? Like those questions, I think some people don't necessarily, maybe the student leader isn't equipped to answer
Mhm.
it, and so sometimes we're scared to say I don't know and let me find out, and then model to them, because that's what discipleship is, right? Is doing life together. And so model to them, as I find out, let's find out together, like how to search for the truth. And I think that that might be one of the big ones.
Yeah, I think another big one is just like sexuality and gender.
But yeah, for sure.
That's been past 10 years more
Yeah,
front and center with young people, depending, once you're in Christian circles, you have parents that have their kids in public school, you have parents who
yeah,
have their kids in private school, and then you have parents who homeschool. And there's a lot of very strong opinions
yeah.
about that. But it doesn't mean that even the homeschool kid is not going to be exposed to it, because it may pop up in your family
Mm,
and may pop up in the church. Like, what do you do
yeah.
when a friend in youth groups invites a non-believing friend who is gender fluid or is
Mhm.
non-binary? And it's like right there, your theology, it has to go again. How do you speak into this? So my next question is, why then aren't traditional models working anymore? Like your traditional youth group with pizza,
Yeah,
games, and Bible.
yeah.
Why isn't that working anymore?
I think it's because when they become social gatherings and they don't become relational like platforms, a place to onboard relationship, because that's really what the model is, right? Is let's create this gathering space to then go into deeper relationship that's ongoing. But instead, when it becomes just programs and we just see students as like you're assigned to me for this year, instead of you matter, like your soul matters to me, and so when we don't, and honestly, it's always typically a top-down problem, right? When the church as a whole views student ministry just as a program, and you don't view those students as humans, then you just turn it into a program. And students don't want to be a part of a program. Everybody's tired of being parts of programs. And to go to what you said earlier, even about the gender thing, like I think some of that, when you view somebody as a part of a program and they're not fitting it, you kind of can just wave them off and you don't treat them how First Peter says to treat them, about like, in your heart to honor Christ as Lord, the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And so sometimes we can just be like, well, majority of us think that that's ridiculous, so we're just going to treat you like a fool. And instead of like, hey, how do we meet you where Christ would have met you had he been here physically, So yeah, I think that that's probably why it's not working. I think it does work at churches that use it relationally, but people that lose sight of the relational equity that they need, they're not going to, be successful.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, yeah, I think even I oversee small groups in my church,
Mm,
and one of the things that I I want to, how do I put this? I don't like all in one approaches, like one size fits all, or
yeah.
let's try to cram everything together, but rather like let's reverse engineer it.
Mm,
And what is the purpose? So then when you can kind of like in a small group context, I tell them, listen, our groups are for two things: community and care.
mm,
If you want more discipleship, more spiritual formation, get into a D group. And that way, one, people don't get disappointed, because we're trying to be upfront. So if we take that same logic, same principle into youth ministry,
yeah.
say, hey, listen, do we unintentionally communicate, hey, we're going to make disciples here, but then all of our programming is all fun and games?
Mm,
Or like, is this a space where We want to build relationships, but at the same time, the ultimate goal is through these relationships, introduce young people to Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like having that philosophy guide everything. So yeah, and it's not like to throw pizza out the window, not to throw the games
No,
out the window. All
you
those
can have
things
a
are
good
cool.
time.
Yeah, we need to understand kids need recess. Like
Yeah.
the anxious generation talks a lot about how kids need before learning, they need like a little 10-minute break, let them go have
Yeah.
fun, come back. So it's like we need to kind of bridge that gap. So with that, I know the church you go to, Building 28. I'm actually meeting with Pastor Chad next week.
Bet.
Sit down and
Awesome.
pick his brain, get to know him. But because I know we go to similar type churches,
Yeah.
how do you bridge the gap between Sunday morning teaching,
Mm.
the academic challenges, and how it's presented to youth group?
Yeah, so I've always been like a student leader. Right now, I'm actually taking a moment from student ministry, but I'm still involved with like our church is big on intergenerational discipleship, regardless if you're just in a program or not. So if people send me their kids and stuff, like I'm down to disciple. But what I've seen with the people that have led as like in the pastoral role within our youth group is understanding that these students are capable of understanding more than sometimes we even give them credit for. And
Hmm.
so we often need to realize that and not try to oversimplify the, biblical understanding that we have in, quote unquote big church, but they're part of the big church. Like these kids aren't just, a subset within the church. They are part of our church. They are the church. And so as we disciple them, and I might have not fully answered what you asked, but like I think that that's really the case is viewing them in that way. And when you frame it in that way, basically just treat it as if it's another D group, but it's just bigger.
Yeah, no, I no, you did because in a sense, the way I used to say it when I was serving youth ministry is that there was this pattern of dumbing down the word
Yeah.
because we think that they don't get it, but a lot of these kids are studying trigonometry and all of these
Yeah.
advanced things in school
Yeah.
that it's almost like we have a false understanding of their capacity.
Mm,
So it's almost like we should take advantage of their curiosity. We should take advantage and make it more palpable in the sense like how can we tell the biblical narrative in a way that is like, hey, what you are experiencing now is not foreign. Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. So what you are experiencing, not foreign. Let me take you to scripture and show you
yeah.
why it's not foreign. Just because they didn't have technology, like
Hmm.
the advancement that we have today, doesn't mean that the sinful heart of man has changed.
Mm,
So let's talk about the science dilemma
okay.
because this is as long as Darwinian evolution has come on the scene
Hmm.
and has kind of been the um, in the public school setting the de facto worldview on creation and science. Why do origins matter? Like, why can't we believe that, yeah, evolution is real and still be a Christian?
Okay.
Like, how does worldview matter when we talk about faith development of young people?
Before I answer that, can I say something to what we were talking about right
Yeah.
before this? So the book Do Hard Things, I don't know if you remember that book. It was by the Harris brothers. They wrote it when I think they were like 18. And that's constantly the book that I'm thinking about and referring teenagers to is like for majority of human history, you were expected much of like by the time you were 13, 14.
Yes.
And so this new thing about adolescence and teenage has destroyed our young people to where they don't think well in their adolescence. So that was just one thing that just to add to what we were talking about. So yeah, so or why do origins matter as far as like our faith development? Like yeah, so I believe that it's foundational, right? So if we claim that Jesus is God, well then God has to exist. Like I have to believe, like we have to start there. Well, why, like what makes that important to me? Well, if Jesus is God, that means that he is my creator. He has authority not only over me but over the dynamic of all creation. And so he has authority over death, he has authority over sin, salvation. So kind of like what we talked about before, you have to be able to look at it and look backwards almost. Like, so if Jesus is the centerpiece to everything, why is that important? Well, because he's God. So, in that, he is the only one that can be the substitute for my payment, for my debt. So, who is God? Well, God is the one that has authority over everything. And so, my origins matter because my origins provide me purpose. If I have an origin story that is random and by chance, then it wasn't intentionally designed. But that's not the case, right? When we look at everything, we could dive more into that if you want. And so, like, that's why I believe origins matter. Origins provide us the foundation, like the concrete for our worldview and for our decision making. Basically everything.
Yeah. So, for example, one YouTuber, Ruslan,
Yeah, yeah.
he got a shirt out saying, "We believe in miracles."
Mm-hmm.
And I love it because it was Wesley Huff who I heard on a podcast say that most atheists say, we can explain to you everything, bar us, you give us one miracle.
Yeah.
If you give us the Big Bang, then we can explain
Yeah.
everything. And it was like, okay, so you're telling me that something needs to come from nothing,
Yep.
logically wrong.
Yep.
Like order needs to come from chaos, doesn't make sense. So I agree with you because if we teach our students to like pick apart these arguments and saying, hey, these are just simple clarifying questions you need to ask them, saying, okay, you say that the universe started at the Big Bang. Can you tell me what sparked it?
Yeah.
And for me, going back to another thing you said, Jesus is being that center point. What early on, when you are a new Christian and all of your friends are non-believers, they're gonna come at you. So my early defense was, listen, I know Jesus was real. I know
Uh-huh.
from history he was a real person. I had an experience, an encounter with him that he changed my life. He rose from the dead. And then from that, I was like, but so from that center line, if Jesus affirmed Adam and Eve, I'm banking on him. I don't need to understand it. He affirmed it, and I believe in him. So we can go into the nuances and say, hey, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, we can. We can read some books together, but it goes into like when we talk about gender and
Uh-huh.
sexuality and all these things. I said, all right, what did Jesus kind of say explicitly and also by implication?
Yep.
So there are a lot of things when I speak to family members who identify as LGBTQ, they're like, Jesus never said anything. I was like, yes, he did.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, he didn't explicitly. I was like, yes, he did. I was like, he said it right here, Matthew 19. Have you not read from the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
He made the male and female, right away gender, and that the husband is going to leave his mother and father, cling to his wife, marriage
Yep.
between man and a woman. It's right. He's affirming creation. He's affirming heterosexual marriage. He's affirming gender, all of right there, but he's not doing it explicitly. And it's almost like if we teach our students to kind of read the things that are there by implication,
Yeah.
we can teach them and say, hey, this is how you combat some of these false narratives or competing worldviews that want to steer you down a bad path. So even on the topic of worldview, how can we use worldview to kind of show the connection between how their worldview actually influences their life choices?
Yeah. Yeah. So what you believe is what you do, right? I think that's something that Jordan Peterson has said a lot when asked, famously asked if he's a Christian, and then
Mhm.
often says, well, what is it to believe? And always saying, your actions say a lot more about what you believe than what you say, which he's right there, right? And so is the book of James, right? So like what you do is the tattletale of what your heart actually believes. And so I think that that's the case for everything in life, right? If I genuinely believe that God requires of me to be faithful to my wife within the covenant that we have established before him, then that belief that then causes me to live in a way that prioritizes faithfulness, prioritizes servitude to my wife, to my children, right? And so it all begins with what your mind and your heart, have to come to grips with, which is why everything that you just said about like our faith is logical. it seems illogical until you fully get a grasp of what we're believing, and it's not the fairy tale that they try to pose us as, right? Actually, it's more logical than because what I think it's famously said by, I mean, it's like the viral video that Joe Rogan has where he says, atheism requires one miracle. I
Hmm.
think I'll stick with Jesus or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reality is the more that I've like been diving into this topic about science and philosophy and all that, they don't just require one miracle. They require trillions of miracles because you have DNA replication has to happen at a 99.99% like accuracy for, like, and that's happening at like it's happening at a rate that we can't even comprehend as humans, for
Hmm.
us to just live and exist, but then also for us to reproduce. Like there are so many miracles that have to take place for our existence. But then on top of that, the amount of information that has to exist, that's just information that regardless if we existed already exists. So the
Hmm.
discoverability of science and math, like there's so many miracles that would have to take place if God didn't exist. We actually require that there is just a intelligence that has the wherewithal to be able to make all of this.
Yeah. Like we know inherently that the smartphone that you have, the
Yeah.
iPhone that you have,
Yeah.
did not just come to
Exactly.
be.
Exactly.
Someone far more intelligent had to create that iPhone. And scientists, Christian scientists would say the human body is far more complex
Yeah.
than the iPhone.
Exactly.
So it, like, to your point, we do have a logical faith, and I think the challenge for parents is that they think they don't have all the answers.
And they don't.
Yeah.
None of us do.
Yeah, but I love the era in which we live
Hmm.
because I may not have the answers, but I can find them.
Yeah.
It's even crazy now that you can chat with ChatGPT and just simply ask the questions like, "Hey, can you give me the top 5 arguments for XYZ or the top 5 books?" Or even Google, whatever. The answers are out there, and not to say that there isn't an element of mystery in our faith, because
For sure.
there is, but I would argue that we have a logical faith, that we can have sufficient credible answers. I'll put it to you this way. A friend of mine texted me today. He was like, "Hey bro, what are your thoughts on the Shroud of Turin?"
Mm.
And I'm like, I don't really have any thoughts. I've heard arguments for that it's actually the shroud that Jesus was
Yeah.
buried in, and heard arguments against it. But to me, my faith does not hinge on a relic.
Yep. Yep.
That's cool. The relic is cool, but my faith is not banking on whether they disprove that relic. So with that, our young people wrestle with doubt
Mm.
and mystery. That's the good thing about mystery, because we're not going to have all those answers. So how can we, within the context of youth group, or even the context of even what you guys do with the science dilemma, how can
Mhm.
we use doubt to strengthen faith as opposed to encouraging doubt?
Yeah, I think so. There was actually, let me look it up. So I just did an interview with
Okay.
Dr. William Dembski. He's like a mathematician, philosopher, and he also has a master. He's PhD in both of those, and then has a master's in theology as well. And he said something about doubt that I thought was really good and profound. I'm not gonna be able to find it, but he basically said, that the utility of doubt should just drive you to more answers. Like it should just drive you closer to truth. Like you shouldn't be scared of doubt, because doubt isn't necessarily like what we identify as doubt sometimes is actually just being a critical thinker and wanting to understand the why or how. Like, God, how does this work? How do I make sure that I'm able to give a defense for my belief? Like that's not actually doubt sometimes. You know what I'm saying? And so I think sometimes we don't train people to understand how to think and what is good thinking and bad thinking, and what is the goal of thinking, you know? Like, is our goal truth? Because if it's truth, then postmodernism's out the door, right? So, and the reality is majority of academia that does believe in postmodernism doesn't actually live by it because they live off of truth. So, if the goal of my thinking is for me to think truly, then I'm allowed to have hard questions, because hard questions then take me to really good answers. So I think that is one of the things that we struggle with in the faith often. I remember having some pastors. I got saved when I was 16. I was tearing up my Bible, trying to just, learn every little thing. And anytime I would come across like passages that I know, certain pastors that I love and respect till today, but I know that they skipped over because they felt like it was a little too scary of a topic, and just being like, hey, I thought we trusted the Holy Spirit. I thought that the word of God is something that we could just trust. And I think that that's the approach that we have to have when we lead students, is like, we're not scared of this thing, you know? Like, God has a monopoly on truth. Yeah.
So even with so some practical stuff, how
Yeah.
can we create safe spaces for hard questions?
Mm.
Like how can we allow students to say, you know what, I trust you enough.
Yeah.
These are the things I'm wrestling with,
Yeah.
or even in the teaching moment, because even for me, I think for youth ministry, I think we have to approach teaching a little bit different than Sunday morning preaching. It has to be more of a dialogue where you can allow them to interrupt. And to your point, I had this discussion with one of my coworkers the other day just about like the different churches in the area and how you can kind of get a whiff of where a church is at theologically by how they approach preaching on Sunday mornings.
Of course.
So if they skip over certain
Yeah.
verses or certain topics, they're like, all right, they're probably more seeker sensitive.
Yeah.
I'm not dunking on seeker sensitive churches. They're reaching lots of people for Jesus, and I appreciate what they do for the kingdom. But then there are other churches who are going to, and what I use for her as an illustration, I was like, if they're going to preach through the book of Malachi, verse 2 in the first chapter poses a very difficult question,
Mm.
because it starts off with saying, "How have I loved you? I hated Esau, but I loved you."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it poses a question. Wait a minute. God just said he hates. I thought
Yeah.
God is love. And right away, when you don't skip over verses like that, you invite wrestling. It's like, hold up, I may have to do a deeper word study because God is love. And that is a true statement.
Yeah.
So what does it mean here that he hates? What does it
Mm.
mean that he abhors? So all I use that as an illustration. I said the churches who don't gloss over certain verses and they just preach through books of the Bible and don't skip verses,
Yeah.
they typically lean on this theological camp. Not all, but typically. So with that, how can we create safe spaces for hard questions at home or even in the youth group as we
Mhm.
catechize and disciple, as we're reaching students within youth group? What does that safe space even look like?
So I think so safety typically mirrors intimacy, right? So a one-on-one conversation with my wife is going to be should be, right? The safest place. And as her husband, I should create the safest place for her to be able to have that conversation. And then from there, they become less safe sometimes, depending on the relationships. Obviously, if you have a father in the faith that gets everything, because your wife shouldn't bear everything for you. That's typically still maybe a one-on-one, maybe three people at most. Like, and then it gets less intimate the bigger the group gets. And so I think that one of the things is having an understanding on how much skin in the game does this group of people have, because there's been times in student group that, so one kid will start opening up about something, and they're kids, so they don't always see 5 years ahead. So we'll just, one of the things I taught some of the guys I was with was like, hey, next time just tell them, hey, let me talk to you after group. Let's keep going on this, because that's a side conversation that I want you to be safe enough to be able to have without being judged, made fun of by other students. So I think one of them is that, vulnerability, us modeling vulnerability and creating the safe space. But then we also have to model what it is to have, like, I think Mark calls it the Vegas rule with his guys. And so I remember, I think it was his church that had this thing called like the boiler room. And when you go to this
Yeah.
group of men, yeah, you know about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you would just be like, everybody in this room, till this day, I have never let one of the talks from the boiler room ever leave my mouth.
Hmm.
There was an understanding amongst men that what's said here stays here. So again, yeah, I think that that's how you create the safe spaces. You model vulnerability and you make sure that everybody understands the stakes of what's in that space.
Yeah. When I was teaching last year in Trinity, I developed a rapport with a lot of the students.
Mm,
And I would just tell them out the gate, listen, you can trust me. Going to, if you come to me with some of your doubt, if you come confess sin, I'm going to tell you the only way I'm going to tell your parents is and is right away. If you're telling me you're about to harm yourself,
yeah.
if you harm somebody else,
Yep.
but barring those two things, I got your back. Let's wrestle. And it's like letting them know that if I did violate them, it's because of those two things.
Which is
So
for
they
their safety.
just exactly. And they can't get mad at me for it. I told you from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's good.
So so
Yeah, you
yeah,
set clear expectations and boundaries where you're saying, my goal is your safety and your flourishing. The moment that your safety is at risk, then because my goal is your safety, I have to, yeah. That's good. I love that.
yeah. So talk to me about the science dilemma,
Okay.
what it is, the purpose,
Yeah.
and where our listeners can find it.
Okay. Yeah, so the Science Dilemma is a resource that was created for basically Christian families, churches, homeschool families to be able to educate their students and themselves on the topic of intelligent design. How does science explain that Darwinian evolution is not actually the answer to our life's origins, and instead an intelligent designer who we believe is Jesus created us? It's an academic resource. We do have a student group, like a student workbook that has Bible verses in it, but we created it strategically as mostly academic so that when you are going through it, you're able to have these conversations in a way that aren't just like, well, because the Bible says so, but instead you're able to say, hey, DNA code is a lot more sophisticated than computer code to the point where we still don't fully understand it. We're not replicating DNA the way that we are computer code. Yet, why don't we believe that that is created? It's literally a language model. It's extremely efficient at self-replicating and creating, new creatures like babies. Yet, we don't believe that this amazing, efficient code that's existed for what some believe is thousands, others believe is millions. But let's use the logic of those that believe it's millions. So this code has been able to replicate, develop, and create new things, and is not created. So then we can use, scientific conversation to then have that dialogue. And that's what it was made for. And so you can find it at thesciencedilemma.com. And then you can also, and that's where it's basically like a bundled package where you get 4 episodes, all the curriculum and resources with it. And then you can also, if you have Right Now Media, go there and watch it for free through your church's subscription. And then if you wanted any of like the digital download assets, we have a link specifically for that.
Well, thanks for joining us today on this episode of Baffled. If this episode resonated with you, leave us a review or leave us a comment, and be sure to pass it along to someone raising or discipling the next generation. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like the video and subscribe to this channel to be notified for future episodes. Again, my name is Jonathan, and see you next week on Baffled.